Hello world, it's Austin. Let's talk about being transgender and Christian. So last week I talked about some of my frustration with using a theological argument about self-denial to keep trans people from expressing themselves or understanding their gender identity. The bottom line of that video is that telling trans folks that they need to deny or kill off that part of themselves has been and continues to be incredibly damaging. And on top of that, connecting the biblical practice of self-denial to something as integral as somebody's gender identity is dubious at best. However, it is currently the season of Lent, which is part of the church year that leads up to Easter, and it's a time when a lot of Christians do embrace some kind of practice of self-denial, and I'm definitely not saying that that's bad or that we should get rid of it. So today, as a kind of counterbalance to last week's video, I thought I would share a couple of ways that self-denial may actually be relevant to trans folks and share a bit of my story. So, for instance, when I was first starting out my transition, I kept running into this problem where I would find myself miles ahead of everybody else in the process. Like right after I finally came out to myself and admitted that I was trans, I realized that I was ready to get on hormones right away. It felt like I'd been trying to ignore this thing my whole life and shove it back into the closet and just not think about it. And now that it was finally all coming together and I was starting to get it, I was like, okay, cool, let's get on with it, I'm ready. The problem was that it was at this point that I started coming out to people. So I'm talking to my mom about it, and I'm coming out as trans to her and talking about it and helping her understand, and I'm like, okay, so I'm trans and also I want to start hormones, right now. And she was like, wait, what? I had years to process all of my thoughts and feelings about it, and she hadn't had that much time, and so this was all being sort of sprung on her at one time, and she didn't have as much time to think through it as I did. I had gotten to here in the process, and she had just been here, and that was just because of the amount of time that we had had to process things. So I decided to wait a while, to let everybody sort of catch up with me, and honestly, it was a really hard time. I was going by Austin and using he, him, his pronouns, but I was getting misgendered all the time, and nobody seemed to know what they should do with me, and I just felt stuck and kind of frustrated and impatient. But it really did help the people close to me get used to things. I took my parents to therapy with me, and I talked a lot to my sisters and to my girlfriend and to my other friends. I even had coffee with the members of my family that were really not down with me being trans, even though I wasn't totally sure it would help. And in the middle of this, I remember thinking, I know this is the better way to do things. I know this is going to be better in the end, but right now, I almost just wish that I could go off 100 billion miles away and do all the transition things that I feel that I need to do and then come back and deal with it all later. I wanted to do things at my speed. So for me, self-denial took the form of waiting, of putting the needs and desires of other people before mine for a little while so that they had some time and so that I could walk with them in their process. And I'm not saying that everybody was 100% okay with things by the time I started hormones. In fact, some of my family members still are not okay with it. But what I felt called to do personally was to wait as long as I could and to spend time with them in their journey too. But as Ecclesiastes 3 says, there's a time for everything. A time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. It's hard to figure out sometimes whether this is a time for self-denial or a time for self-care. Sometimes we need to put our own wants and needs aside, and sometimes we need to realize when we've been beaten down to the point of requiring some care ourselves. That's why so many of these trans and Christian videos are upbeat and affirming and focus on love so much, because as trans Christians, as queer Christians, we get so much negativity thrown at us all the time that we need something to balance that out. So, if you're trans and Christian and you feel like you're at a time in your life where you need to practice some self-denial, maybe think about some ways that you can put other people first. This might mean putting off parts of your transition for a while, or only expressing yourself in certain places or at certain times. It might mean being gentler with people who misgender you and who don't understand, or it might have nothing at all to do with your gender identity. In the Gospels, Jesus often asks people to leave everything they have behind or to sell everything they have and give it to the poor. So maybe you're called to give to other people, either of your time or monetarily. Or maybe you're called to be a part of a whole group that gives up something for the good of others. Like maybe you're part of a group that works to divest from fossil fuels or to divest from child labor. Maybe denying yourself means actively working to dismantle the kinds of privileges that you have in society based on your race or your class or your gender. There are many ways that we as trans Christians can practice self-denial in ways that don't actually destroy us, because that's not really what God's going for. God loves you, and remember what Jesus said in our verses from John last week, that you are called to an abundant life. Abundant not in things or in money or in prestige, but abundant as in overflowing love and joy and peace. So that's what I'm praying that you experience this Lent. Thanks for watching the video this week, everybody. I appreciate all of your comments and the stories that you've been sending me. If you want to say something about the video, go ahead and put it in the comments below. If you want to connect with me on social media in some way, all of the links are all around here. And don't forget that we've got the new Patreon page up, and so I'm looking for new patrons. And if you want special stuff for you, go check out the Patreon page. It's pretty great. We will see you back here next week, everybody. I hope you have a great Wednesday. Peace.